Okay, so I just spent 40 minutes trying to get here. And let me explain why I did. So, hi, my name is Massimar, and I thought what I would like to do today is I would like to go through what was my analysis of, what would you call this? Call it Vortigaunt cave art. And the reason why I'm even going through this is, as someone who was actually hoping to become an anthropologist, I thought this was truly one of the most amazing things that I'd ever seen. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to walk through what was essentially my process for analysis. Obviously, by the time I got to the end, I figured it out a little bit better than I would know at the beginning. But I figure it's also partly essential to kind of explain how you would go through this. So, now, the very first thing I did is I simply started from left to right, theorizing that it's such an essential thing that it probably wouldn't be changed much for something like this, so it would essentially become too confusing. But, considering that fact, what I would like to point out is obviously the central platform, and I think it would be fair to say, if you look at the way this thing is laid out, that is clearly meant to be the center of attention. So, I don't think it would be unfair to say that this is probably the single most important part to at least this Vortigaunt, if not all Vortigaunts. And of course, as anyone who's played Half-Life Alyx would know...
That one's Black Mesa.
Somebody spent a lot of time on this.
And who do we know who was at Black Mesa? That's right, the... Hammer guy. Not Hammer. Crowbar! Crowbar. And yes, I know his name is Gordon Freeman. So, yeah. Let's take... We'll come back to this, actually. I'd like to walk through more of the analysis. Now, one of the first things that I did notice were all the dots and the fact that the dots were in squares. Now, I gotta admit, I'm still not 100% sure about what exactly they represent. But my initial theory is that this is a way to mark the passage of time. Now, as far as why some of those are orange and the rest are not, although that I think comes into play with the puzzle, I don't really remember. I have two separate theories for those. Either those would be marking the significance of those events, as in each of those dots is an event, or it marks the significance of individual Vortigaunts, of which these are all there. As beyond that, my theory would be on these squares, is that essentially that is, as an individual, a Vortigaunt is an individual, and they probably do have a shared history, but some things would either fall outside of either people you know or events that are happening. So my guesses with these is that what is within the squares refers to either a time period or Vortigaunts themselves that are of significance to the Vortigaunt who did this. As you can see, now actually, I personally think, my personal opinion is that actually, I don't know if it is, but I think it might be both. Because if you notice the organization of those squares, as they make their way down that, where the structure very clearly changes. I mean, you know, something like this, I mean, that's quite a few squares. I mean, they overlap over there. I mean, you know, unfortunately, once you get into this area, which I will delve later, it kind of takes a turn, but still maintains some semblance of that all the way down until you actually get past the Morgan Freeman area. Now, as I'm looking at it, I am actually realizing that they do stay, actually, the design stays relatively similar, but what does change is the size of those boxes. And I think what's actually interesting to note about that is in the very beginning, they're smaller boxes, and it's actually as you get more along this way that the boxes start getting larger. Now, my personal opinion, you know what? None of this is right. This is all wrong. I'm totally doing this wrong. I'm totally doing this wrong. Okay, so 1, 2, and 3, and go. Okay, so I'm gonna start this a little more simply. Okay, so let's start by describing what we're physically seeing. Over here, we see a group of Vortigaunts. There are 5 Vortigaunts, whose center of attention is a single Vortigaunt on his knees. It looks like that Vortigaunt is receiving kindness or empathy or something along those lines. However, what I would actually like to point out, though, is I was originally assuming that these were the objects that the Vortigaunt were giving this one. And then, but that would make that his pile. So, yeah, I think actually what I'm thinking instead, hypothetically, is that maybe what this is trying to depict in this, in the Vortigaunt history, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, and the ring makes 5, which just so happens to match 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then maybe the conclusion of that is that the way the Vortigaunts see themselves is essentially a brotherhood, and that the way they see themselves, evolving, continuing with the times, so on and so forth in their ancient history, is essentially that it's through these acts of kindness that lead to greater events. Not greater events, but a continuation of history. Now, I'm probably wrong about those in relation to those, but beyond that, I'm not really sure what they could represent. And right here, by the way, I think this is actually my favorite thing. It has a spider-like design, and it's above the Vortigaunts. Now, my personal theory behind this, and actually there's another one up there, and then one down here, and maybe even one up there, so clearly, my personal theory, Vortigaunts are prey animals, and these are the predators. Now, the truth of the matter is I'm kind of guessing what these things actually look like. I'm seeing a spider, fangs, the abdomen, the legs, kind of a Black Widow vibe. But the truth of the matter, for all I know, what I'm looking at right now, that's a face. But my personal theory is that Vortigaunts were prey animals that managed to survive and thrive through cooperation. So I think that's what this initial segment represents. The predators, maybe the ecosystem and how interconnected everything is, and finally rising above being an animal by cooperation, empathy, and support, which would lead to further parts of the environment. Which then leads us to this first section. Now, if I were to guess, I think these two things might actually be describing the same thing. I could be wrong on this. I definitely think I need to see how it continues to the rest in order to say for sure. But my theory is that this would be the visual depiction of the history, and whereas what I see in this is more a mathematical depiction of the history, like literally notating how much time passes, whereas this is more notating what is happening. And it actually is interesting to see that some of those dots and some of those dots, it kind of flows into the next one. So, I was working, I do have an additional hypothesis that maybe those dots represent individual Vortigaunt or Vortigaunt clans. I think that's quite possible too. But for now, I think I'm going to treat these sections purely as a notation of historical time, where I'm going to leave things like these as more of a visual representation of said history. So what we have here is oh no, those are not dots, but we have the beginning of the line around here covering events along those lines, which eventually leads us to the second major event in Vortigaunt history, which would be the arrival of the Combine. And as we all know, the Combine are multiversal conquerors who essentially find other species and, you know, uses them for its own purposes. Yeah, this definitely depicts the Combine. That's right. Yeah, so this represents the Combine finding them. And at first we see them arriving from the skies. Then we see them delivering something. And if I were to take a guess at what this is, I would say what they were delivering from the shuttles were people, soldiers. And this also really shows just how not undeveloped, but well, just how technologically undeveloped they were at the time. I mean, although we clearly see now these ships arriving, dropping soldiers, I mean, this section, in my opinion, is very clearly a depiction of the ships entering the atmosphere and the meteor-like trail it would leave as it goes through the sky, which, you know, is one of the things I think would be particularly terrifying in the real world, is the classic sort of, you know, how would primitive life react to advanced life, and how would they have to make their understanding of those situations. But then we get to here, which very clearly depicts a, what are those things called, a crawler? Destroying the Vortigaunts, just obliterating them. Actually, you even see some from this side getting in on the action too. And then, oh, that's actually worth pointing out. The section with the Combine, the squares are much larger and much more spread apart. Yet they still share the same 16-dot section. And in my opinion, I think that is meant to denote the significance of those events. I think each square represents a time period, and it's the size of those squares that denote the significance for them. Now, yeah, and I am going through this right now, and a unifying theme does seem to be no more than 2 of these orange dots per panel. On every single one of them, it looks like. One thing I can safely say I haven't quite figured out yet is, for example, if there's any significance behind this meteor being lit in this panel. That could just be a stylistic choice, but I am not entirely sure about that one. Okay, so we have handled the arrival of the Combine. We have handled the Combine going to war. Not really going to war, more of a wiping out the Vortigaunt. And unfortunately, it looks like the, you know, arrival, battle, loss, and then the wandering journey. Now, granted, if I can be completely honest, the section between this one and this one really particularly bothers me. My guess, if I am remembering my Half-Life lore correctly, is that the Vortigaunt wandered and were eventually found by Brain Baby and were enslaved by it. The Brain Baby was, of course, on the run from the Combine as well, but not a good entity. So, essentially, what this is representing...
Looks like pictures of Vortigaunts.
And what else? Well, the entity that eventually enslaved them did so by psionically controlling them. And what's actually interesting to me about this one is that what it represents is there was... a caste system, for lack of a better word. That Vortigaunt is clearly above the rest, in my opinion, or at least the center of the rest. And I don't necessarily get the impression that, you know, how to explain this? I don't get an impression that that Vortigaunt was in charge of the others. If anything, when I see this, it looks like suffering, but that actually could be my own human understanding. To me, the lidded eye on that Vortigaunt and the streaks of the brown, to me, that represents sadness and crying, but that's a very human understanding and is quite possibly coloring my perception. You know, I would say it does look like there's, I mean, obviously the colors are a big clue, but I do feel like there is enough detail in some of these lower Vortigaunt and their poses to correlate back with this one. And I might even safely say that these Vortigaunt look like they're in discomfort. This one looks like it's in mourning. And yet it seems to be, you know, other than Magic Mind Baby, clearly above the rest. You know. But beyond that, I would just like to point out that clearly they're deifying it. You know, you got the rays of the suns, at least that's what it would be in human culture, but I'm guessing here that's more of a representation of psychic power than, you know, than like literally rays of the sun type thing. Yeah. Yep. And as far as what these symbols down here mean, I'm not entirely sure. I'm actually going to backtrack, see if I saw them pop up down over here. Like that. Wild branches. Oh, not the same. So they're not the same. So these symbols pop up here for the first time. Yeah, I got to admit, I do not understand these symbols on the bottom. Obviously, those look like eyes, and the eyes are incredibly significant. It's worth pointing out that the trail from that stuff led to the first of that stuff. Oh! Okay. I'm willing to take a guess and say, with the lines through them, that represents a blinded Vortigaunt as opposed to a seeing Vortigaunt. And actually, holy crap. If you go back here, actually, yeah, those, which I wasn't entirely sure why they were different than these might either signify an individual Vortigaunt or an idea Vortigaunt have that was like a, you know, a concept that is, how to explain this? I would say this represents a Vortigaunt seeing. Beyond that, I'm not sure how to put it. It is worth interesting that apparently there are the variation of, you know, the outer and the inner. Looks like that's a both. But anyway, back to over here. So, Vortigaunt see their slavery. Vortigaunt cannot comprehend their slavery. I feel like those represent death. I feel like those Y-shaped branches represent death, but I have no proof of that. I will have to keep an eye out to see if those reappear later on. Okay. So what we see here is a fairly significant amount of their time was spent wandering, and then they were imprisoned. Which leads us to over here. And wow, okay. You know, actually, I think the first time I went through here, I couldn't figure out what these are, and if I were to take a guess at what these are, I would say that is a depiction of either star charts. No, just star charts. That would be the only thing that could be is star charts. As far as what that thing is on the top, I don't know. I don't know what that thing is. If anyone knows what that could be, I'd be very interested to hear. But my opinion is on these, at least, those represent star charts, and this down here represents the experience of living on an alien planet for them. My honest theory is that those are structures, but that's very interesting. Okay, so this is very, 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 very similar to these, but also obviously different. I mean, stylistically, sort of similar, but shape-wise completely different. And if I were to hypothesize, it could be that whatever that is something horrific, something that causes them damage, something that they might even be afraid of. And that is why it has the predatory design of their initial predators, which is just amazing. As far as what it actually is, I do not know. I don't know what that is. Looks like Vortigaunt. I mean, because those dots, I mean, I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like they could be Vortigaunts, periods of time, and it looks like whatever those are coming out of it or getting sucked into it. And frankly, I have no idea which. But I'm pretty sure that's what these are, is living on an alien planet. Let me know if I'm wrong on that one. What's down here? Huh. Continuing, this was their history as they were... oh, that's interesting. Okay, so... if you notice the squares up here, that one is separate. That one is separate. Link, 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 link. Separate, 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 separate. Link, 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 link. My theory behind that is that is how connected these periods of time are to each other. I mean, think about it like this. Let's say something climactic happens in your society. Once your society recovers, it's going to be dramatically different from the one that you remember. And I think that's what these are representing, is that first one would most likely be the Vortigaunt as animals, and this would be their eventual path on civilization until the Combine arrived, which completely screws things up. I mean, you know, you had that event, which was completely separate and unique. Completely separate and unique, the actual, you know, from the arrival to the invasion to the war. And what's interesting is the war and the loss are connected, if you notice. You know, so you have Vortigaunt as an organism, Vortigaunt as a social society, Vortigaunt and their relationship with the Combine, which eventually leads to them traveling in space. And from that, you have their journey in space to the arrival of this thing. And that leads to down there. What's interesting is, at least to me, is how disconnected the journey is after this point. You know, I mean, if you notice, it's been fairly smooth. There's that section, there's that section. You know, they take up large chunks of the Vortigaunt history. And then we get here, which I guess I just assumed that this was a much more important part of their history than it might have been. And that, of course, leads us... ooh. I doubt it. That, of course, leads us to here, the Morgan Freeman. Obviously, they're starting to idolize him. And I must have been completely wrong about those eyes in retrospect. Those are clearly eyes with the lines, so that does not mean... that actually definitely means seeing something. And I guess the plain ones mean something else, then. Yeah, because those are clearly signifying the significance with which they view this psychically. Whereas... interesting. Perhaps individual suffering rather than communal. Individual and communal, maybe those are the two separations of those. I'm not entirely sure. Obviously that one is larger and probably more significant than the others. I think those are all relatively the same symbol. So I'm not sure there's any significance there. But what's also kind of cool is I was talking about earlier, much earlier, how I decided to just go left from right, but that there's really, for an alien species, there's no reason to assume they would follow that organizational pattern. But what I would like to say is that this might be how the Vortigaunt see things, is you have the past on one side, and you have the future on the other. Because right here is pretty much, I think actually, maybe slightly in... oh no! This is current, because I think that is representing Morgan Freeman imprisoned. I might be mistaken on that. Yeah, and actually, because of that, in retrospect, maybe that's the central chamber in Black Mesa. Star charts or galaxy chart or universe charts leading up to that. Down there was that planet that was, for some reason, significant in Half-Life 1. And, yeah, leads us to here. And here's, in my opinion, this is kind of cool. From here, the journeys of time become smooth again. And this is why, in my personal opinion, I don't really think that these squares represent the passage of time, because if this is moving forward, which I think it is, and I'm going to actually take a quick 2 seconds to analyze it, but there are way too many squares here, considering this would have been maybe Half-Life 1, Half-Life 2, and this is Half-Life Alyx. All of this, which I have a hard time believing. But let me just jump ahead a little bit, make sure. Yeah, this is clearly the future, or at least is meant to be a depiction of what they see happening, the individual sees happening in the future. Okay. So, after the Morgan Freeman incident, passages of time, passages of time, passages of time to here. And, I know, maybe I jumped into this video a little too soon, because if I can be honest with you, I have no idea what this is. I have no idea what those are. I think that looks very much like their Overlord from back over there, but beyond that, I have no idea what any of these are. I mean, maybe those things could be the same species as that one. I think I can say that, because those are clearly not Vortigaunt. They're also wiped out, just taken out. So maybe what this is actually depicting is after the interference of Morgan Freeman, maybe this represents the Combine absolutely obliterating their conquerors. You know, just absolutely obliterating them. And the Vortigaunt, of course, you know, are in exultation and happiness. Oh, okay, actually. So that's clearly... okay. Again, this is meant to be moving forward in time. See, the problem is, I don't know what those beasts are, nor how they are related to that. Those things clearly look like that. I don't know what that is. I mean, it kind of reminds me of like one of the floating Combine eyes. It kind of reminds me of maybe just one of their eyes, but can't place it beyond that. Which leads us to over here. And the Vortigaunt, you know, finally are free, and yeah, woohoo! You know, and then finally right down here, where thanks to the greatness of Morgan Freeman, the tower is conquered, and humans will go to space, and the Vortigaunt are free! Hallelujah! Yeah, I don't know what that is. Nor do I know what those are. From the tower, the beasts came and shouted away the enemies. You know? It's possible, maybe... Actually, yeah, I think I might even want to say that. This could represent the human rebellion. Don't ask me why, but maybe it does. These represent those dog creatures that we would see in Half-Life 2. And this represents them having conquered both them and the Combine, maybe? Or it's something that could have much more significance. Because one thing I also want to point out is overlap is not quite as significant until you get to around here. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that it could also represent, you know, each one of those dots is a universe, because there's multiversal concepts to this. But anyway, what I can safely say is that I think this is moving towards the future. This represents the inevitable conclusion of the Half-Life series. This represents Vortigaunt being free, maybe even, you know, actually being a truly great species, you know, not just living in a place like this. And I think this represents the destruction of all their enemies. I really don't know what these things are, though. But yeah, that is my analysis of this. This is, I got to admit, this is one of my favorite things in my entire life. It's a perfect blend of having to analyze a cultural artifact and a video game and VR. It is truly amazing what they did here, and I hope that throughout my life that we see more things like this. And I gotta say, this was one of the most satisfying puzzles I've ever seen in my life, and it has nothing to do with the result, but simply understanding what I'm looking at was just so satisfying. If there's anything you feel like I got completely incorrect, or anything you feel like I completely missed, or just anything you want to hear more of an explanation about, or even if you just want to hear more about the history of the Half-Life universe, multiverse, let me know. I don't think anyone's ever going to watch this, but I kind of had some fun making it, other than being incredibly tired right now. So I hope you enjoyed it, and if you didn't, I hope you didn't watch the whole thing. And that's it. Bye-bye.